welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite, and this is episode number 48, where I will be talking about a game that both gives you fish and teaches you how to fish, Nusfjord, from designer Uwe Rosenberg. So you can probably tell just from this intro here that this episode's going to be a little bit different than normal because Carter is not here today. It's the holiday season, there's a lot going on, and we just could not line up our schedules to get together and record an episode with both of us here, which may happen again before this holiday season is over. But we didn't want you to go without an episode, so I'm going to do one by myself today for a game that's really more up my alley than up Carter's. And that is Nusfjord. So we will get to that in just a moment. But first, I want to start like we always do with the news, including a very special news announcement at the end. So our first bit of news for this week is that Garphill Games has announced the final entry in the West Kingdom trilogy. This is going to be called Viscounts of the West Kingdom. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the West Kingdom trilogy, that is the trilogy of games that starts with Architects of the West Kingdom and then was continued in Paladins of the West Kingdom, which we just received a review copy of and will be reviewing on this show in the near future. And we've been wondering what the last entry in that series is going to be, and we now know that this is Viscounts of the West Kingdom. So this will be a game that has the same kind of art style that we've seen in the other games from the Miko, and it will have a deck building mechanic, and we know that it's going to take place at the end of the king's reign, where people are beginning to doubt his reign because he is offering peace to people who come and want to attack or assault the kingdom instead of repelling them. And so because the people are beginning to doubt the king, you, as one of his viscounts, have to balance loyalty to the king so that you can keep your head, I would guess, with gaining the favor of the people, because if the people oust the king, then you're still going to want a place in the new order to come. So that's a pretty cool and interesting take on this kind of West Kingdom setting that we haven't seen in the other two games. Other than that, though, we really don't know that much about it. Based on what I could tell from some Board Game Geek threads, it sounds like weight-wise, this one is going to be situated between Paladins and Architects, with Architects being the less heavy of the two. So kind of a middleweight Euro game with this West Kingdom theme and cool artwork, and I don't know, I loved Architects of the West Kingdom. I'm really looking forward to Paladins, and honestly, if this one is as good as those two, of course I'll be interested in that as well, and we certainly want to do a review of that on the show. There's no confirmation of a solo mode just yet, but we're assuming that because the other two games in the series have had it, that this one will as well. And we also don't really know anything about the Kickstarter date yet. We do know that it's coming sometime next year, and you'll just have to keep your ears open for more news about that. As soon as we learn more about it, we will definitely share about it on this show. So that is Viscounts of the West Kingdom from Garphill Games. Our second bit of news this week is that Black Sonata, the hidden deduction solo-only game from Side Room Games, will be getting an expansion. So this is an expansion that's been playtested a little bit on the BGG forums recently called the Fair Youth. This is a modular expansion that offers several new ways to expand the game, and if you don't know anything about Black Sonata, you should definitely check out our review. I think Black Sonata was my best surprise of last year. I really, really loved it. It's an interesting hidden movement and deduction game, which you don't see very often in solo format. The theme was very interesting to me, where you're trying to pursue Shakespeare's Dark Lady around London. And as I understand it, the game has been out of print pretty much since we reviewed it, which is really unfortunate timing. With this Kickstarter, which will start on January 4th, you will be able to get the expansion, and there will also be a reprint of the base game. So if you missed out on that the first time, don't miss out. It's a really great, interesting game, and I can't wait for you to check it out for yourself. That is Black Sonata and its new expansion, The Fair Youth, coming to Kickstarter on January 4th. And our last bit of news this week is something just a little bit different. You all will know that we don't have a Patreon for Solosaurus or anything like that. We don't run Kickstarters, and we may do something like that one day, but honestly, for now, this is just a hobby for us and one that we enjoy, and we don't want to run the risk of ruining a thing that we enjoy by trying to monetize it. We enjoy creating content for you that is free and that is, we hope, both helpful and entertaining. That's what we really designed this show to be, something that you enjoy listening to, but also something that can help you to make better purchases for yourself, to be responsible with your money and to buy games that you'll actually play and enjoy instead of buying games that will just sit around and shrink. That was part of the reason that we started this podcast in the first place. We wanted to create in-depth reviews only and to stay away from previews for games, and also to give you a focus on critique of the game so you can see where this game may or may not line up with your tastes and make an informed decision for yourself about whether it would be a good fit for your collection. And all of that, I think, is working out pretty well. We are enjoying making the show. We think it's helpful for people. And so we just don't want to kill our desire to do it by doing any of those other monetizing activities. That said, we have been approached a few times by people who are interested in partnering with us for previews or for advertisement of some kind, and so far none of those things have been a fit. Like I said, we don't want to do previews at all, but we got an offer recently from a company called Stone Valley Games that seems to be a good partner for us, and one that will help us to offset some of the costs of running this show, because we are actively losing money making the show, which is fine, but we would like to, move to a place where we are spending less to keep the show going. And Stone Valley Games has emerged as a good partner in that regard. So if you've not heard of Stone Valley, I had not either, but they're a really interesting, small, e-commerce focused game store that has an emphasis on solo games. So this is a business that is based out of Alabama in the U.S., and it is owned by a husband and wife team, Eric and Wendy Strack. Eric runs the website, works with distributors, handles marketing, researches Kickstarters worth backing as a retailer, runs their social media, produces gameplay videos, all that good stuff, and Wendy is the packer and the shipper. It's a setup that works really well for them because it allows Eric to do his normal day job while Wendy handles orders during the day, and then Wendy also takes care of guests that come by Stone Valley for game night. So they make a really good team, and I think they make a good partner for us because they have a focus on solo games. When I talked with Eric about the possibility of a partnership, one of the things that he mentioned is Eric served over 25 years in the U.S. Army as an air and missile defense officer, with about half of that time being spent deployed to foreign countries. And so Eric used games to escape the kind of day-to-day realities of his military duties. And as you might expect, solo games are a good fit for that kind of wind-down time in that situation. So one of the problems that Eric discovered while he was over there is that game stores rarely choose to ship to overseas military, and the ones that do tend to ship pretty poorly. So Eric vowed when he was in that situation that one day if he opened his own shop, he would focus on getting deployed military, their families, and contractors properly shipped items. And he would do it for free to demonstrate his support for their efforts. So one of the things that's distinctive about this shop is not only that they have a focus on solo-friendly games, but also that they offer free shipping to AA, AE, and AP addresses. So if you have a family member or a friend or someone else that you love or care about who is in the U.S. military and deployed overseas, you can buy a game through Stone Valley Games and it will be shipped to their APO address or overseas address for free. So that was one of the distinctives that we thought made them an interesting partner in addition to that solo board game focus. And also the other thing that drew us in is that their prices are pretty low. They're within a few dollars of all the major competitors. And in addition to that, they also offer something a little bit different, both through their loyalty system and with discounts on future orders with product reviews. One of the realities of being a board game store is that sometimes a game cannot be listed below a certain price because of an order from the publisher. So by offering a loyalty system and a discount for the cart, that ensures that the product price follows the distribution rules, but also that the customer saves in the end. So that's one of the reasons they decided to take this approach. And the other is they recognize that not everybody has a friendly local game store, and they don't get the value that comes with having a local game store, which is a community, right? A place where you can go and talk to other people about games or get recommendations for games. They want to be that for you in an online space. So if you don't have a friendly local game store, you can at least have a friendly distant game store. So that is all we're going to say about Stone Valley for now, but we just wanted to be upfront with you. You will start hearing some short ads for Stone Valley on our episodes And we just wanted you to know why we decided to go with a partnership like this, and specifically why we decided to go with this one. It was not something that we approached lightly. It was something that we gave thought to, and we believe that Stone Valley Games is a good partner for us and potentially a good partner for you as well. So check them out at stonevalleygames.com. You can see more about the games that they carry. You can ask them to get a game for you if they don't have it in stock. And you can also learn a little bit more about their own line of games and storage solutions that they'll be coming out with in the near future. So check them out on the website, stonevalleygames.com. Follow them on Facebook, and we will be doing some promotions and maybe giveaways or something like that with them in the future. So stay tuned for more information about that. Okay, that's all for the news for this episode. So we're just going to get right into the review, which is for Nusfjord. Nusfjord is a game that comes to us from designer Uwe Rosenberg and Lookout Games, and was released in 2017 and plays 1 to 4 players. In Nusfjord, players take on the role of fishing company owners in the little town of Nusfjord in Norway, and they try to develop the harbor and the surrounding landscape in ways that profit your business. So by placing workers, you can enlarge your fleet, clear the forest, build new buildings, and satisfy local elders to gain money and ultimately points to win the game. So we're just going to jump right into it here with a look at the components. And I have to say, if you've ever played a Uwe Rosenberg game or a game from Lookout Games, you'll know that their components are good, solid quality. I would consider this industry standard for a Euro game at this point. The components are not going to blow your mind, but overall, they are really solid. Nice thick tiles for these long forest pieces that go over your player board. A beautiful setting and color palette, which makes the game really pleasing to look at and to play, I think. And the whole production just feels like good, standard Euro game fare. There are a few small gripes that I have with them, and nothing too major, but there are some things that I want to point out. The first thing is that the building cards that you're going to be building, they go down onto your player board, which is like an overview of a forest setting where you're going to be building buildings or clearing or reseeding forests. And for some reason, they didn't make the cards look like buildings. They're just these kind of smaller Hobbit cards that are going to be placed down onto the board that tell you what the ability of the building is, how much it costs, how many points you get for it, all that good stuff. But the problem is that when you put it down, it doesn't look like a building. So you've got everything else on your board that looks like you're building up this interesting location and village. But then this one thing feels a little bit out of place to me, especially if you've played Agricola, where you put down the little wooden fences, right? It gives you a feeling like you are creating a farm just visually from looking at your board. I even feel that way to a certain extent from Caverna, even though the room tiles don't look that interesting. They do at least have a little bit of flavor on some of them. This feels like kind of a step backward in that regard. I kind of wish they'd given us just a little bit more of a visual indication that this is a building so that it would immerse you a little bit more in this world that you're creating. Not a big deal, but just something worth mentioning. And also the coins that come in the game. They're cardboard coins, they're standard thickness, they're fine for the most part, except that for some reason, the number 1 value coins are incredibly small, like annoyingly small. The size of coins is not something that I typically care about very much or even have an opinion on at all, really. But in this case, the game isn't as functional because they've cut these coins so small. They roll easily, can very easily roll off the table. They're difficult to find. They're hard to pick up off the table. And the other denominations are fine, but for some reason they decided to cut these 1 value coins quite small. The good news here is that you can buy a small expansion for this, which we'll discuss a little bit later in the review. The expansion is called the Place Deck, P-L-A-I-C-E, I think, for English. And that adds another deck of cards that you can use for buildings, which is really great. But it also adds some metal coins to replace the 1 value coins in the game. That's really nice, but it should be noted that even when you buy that little expansion, it doesn't really come with enough metal coins. And for some reason, they don't also give you coins in the other denominations. So you'll end up with lots of metal 1 value coins and cardboard other coins. It's just kind of an odd choice. I'm really not sure why they decided to do it that way. I would have been fine with a larger number 1 cardboard coin. I mean, I'm pleasantly surprised with the metal version, but I kind of also wish they had given you the others as well so you could have a full set. So I know that's nitpicky, but honestly, it's just something that's bothered me since I had the game, and we like to be extra critical so that you can know if it'll be something that bothers you too. And yeah, man, it's just really annoying. I'm not really sure why they decided to do it that way. But other than those few issues, the production of the game is great. They have wonderful little wooden fish tokens that are great to play with, and I have found that you can take a very small plastic kind of tackle box and put it in there to organize all of the tokens and the coins, and you can keep everything in the main box very easily, just with a few Ziploc bags and a Plano box of some kind. So very easy to store and put away, and quick to set up as well, because the components are handled pretty well, I think. And I would also say that the rules for the game are handled well also. The rule set for this game is, I think, pretty simple. It's definitely not at the level of like a Feast for Odin or Caverna or the Fields of Arla or any of those other bigger games that Uwe Rosenberg has done recently. This is more of a step back for him, more of a step away from the heavier Euro into the more solidly mid-weight category. Actually not that different from Glass Road, I would say, in terms of its weight and depth. But the rules for the game are simple enough that they get out of the way and allow you just to get into the meat of some very streamlined worker placement play, which I really appreciate. And the solo setup for the game is pretty similar to the base game setup. So even though the setup for a solo game isn't in the same section as the base setup, which is what I would prefer, the changes are minimal, and it's pretty easy to figure out what you need to do to set up for the solo game. So very easy and simple there, and it's a good solo rule set, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, that is similar to some of the other Rosenberg games. So really like the rules for the game. And that brings us to the play for this one. And Nusfjord is a hard game to categorize for me because it is at its heart just worker placement, and in some ways just like standard Uwe Rosenberg worker placement. If you have ever played any of his other worker placement games like Agricola or Caverna, this will feel very similar to those and very familiar to you. But there are a couple of interesting tweaks on this system that make this stand out for me. So the basic flow of the game goes like this. You are, at the beginning of every round, going to be getting a haul of fish in from the ocean. So there's this track at the bottom of your player board, which is mostly comprised of just like a storage area where you're going to put extra fish and wood and that sort of thing. 11 spaces that you need to fill out by the end of the game with buildings or forests to prevent from losing points. And then down at the very bottom of the board, this track that has numbers of increasing value that you can cover up with ships over the course of the game. So the more ships you build, the higher the number that you will see on the track, which indicates how many fish you're going to be getting at the beginning of each round. And at the beginning of the game, I think it's like 3, but by the end, you can be getting 10 plus fish every round, which is one of the major resources of the game, along with wood and money. So it's important to be getting all of this fish. So you're going to be getting fish, but unlike other worker placement or Euro games, you don't just get them and put them into a supply. You have to start distributing the fish that you get from your haul to different places around town. So this is where we get into what starts to make this game a little bit different. Before you take fish for yourself, you are first going to give some to the village elders that you have earned favor with, the elders that you've drafted into kind of your collection player board during the game. They need some fish so they can, keep being elders and giving you access to their special abilities. You have to give fish to folks who have shares in your business, which is a very different thing for a Rosenberg game. Basically, what this is you start with, I think, 5 shares in the company, and 2 of them represent your stake in your company. They are your shares of the company. And the other 3, you have to, at some point in the game, sell and buy back. They are unissued shares. So if you were playing a multiplayer game, the way this would work is you have these shares and you can earn money by selling them to kind of a shared market where other people can purchase them if they like, or you can purchase back so that you can get your own shares in your company back again. And those are worth points at the end of the game if they have been sold and repurchased, or they will lose you points at the end of the game if you just hold on to them. So that's a little bit confusing, and we could talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But the way that it affects this phase is, if you were playing a multiplayer game of this, if you had issued some of your shares and someone else had bought them, when you get your haul of fish in, you have to give some of your fish to the people who have shares in your company. So it's an interesting way of replicating how investors would get paid dividends from their investment in your company, but it's fish instead of money, which is, I think, kind of funny. If you're playing this by yourself, though, you don't have people who are buying your shares. So if you issue them, they just sit in that shared market, but you still have to put fish on them as long as they are not your shares. So all that to say, at the beginning of the game, you're only going to be getting 2 fish from your own shares in your company. And so you're incentivized to go and sell the unissued shares and buy them back so that you can get more of the fish that you earn from your haul every round. That was the part of the rules that was the most confusing for me at the beginning of this, but it does make more sense a little bit later. After you have given out shares of fish to people who have a stake in your company or that are just in foreign possession, meaning they're sitting there in that market, you'll then get fish for shares in your personal supply, and any of the remaining will go into your reserve. And it's important to note here that a reserve is not the same thing as a supply. So this is kind of just like a holding place for fish and wood that you can empty out with a worker placement action and get all of those items into your supply. So that first fishing phase is probably the hardest thing for new players to grasp, I think, because I've never seen a distribution of goods that works like this. And honestly, when I first read it in the rules, I thought, this sounds confusing and convoluted, and I'm not sure that this works really well. It actually does work quite well, and once you've played it for even one round, I think it makes good sense. On the board itself, there's a list of all the different places that your fish have to be distributed, so it's not like you're going to forget where they go or anything like that. It's right there in front of you. You can look at your haul size and calculate very easily how many fish you're going to get at the beginning of the round. So if that makes you uneasy, it's really not that bad. But after you've done that, after you've distributed all of these fish, you are then going to get into the meat of the game, which is placing your workers. And you only have 3 workers in this game, and you don't have the opportunity to get more, and you don't have to feed them. And that makes this probably my favorite core worker placement system of any Rosenberg game. If you've not heard any other episodes of this show before where I talk about worker placement, you may not know this, but I really hate games that give you the opportunity to go and take actions to get more workers, because it feels like that's almost always the best option, to go and get more workers so that you can get more done on your turn. I really resent that system when it's in games, and I also hate feeding my workers. I recognize why it works in a lot of systems mechanically, but thematically it just feels boring to me, and it feels like I'm being punished for having workers in the first place. So I really like that they don't include that here. It feels great. It's a very streamlined, simple system. You place a worker, you take that action, and then it's the next person's turn. And the worker placement spots that you've got on the board are pretty much what you would expect in large part. So you have the typical places where you can go and get more wood from deforesting those tiles that are on your board. So you remove one of those big forest tiles that you've got, and you can get some wood. Or you can just go and get wood from those forests, but without removing them, right? So you can be a little more cautious in how you harvest wood from the forest, or you can just go all out and get more wood, but it removes it from the board. And in some cases, that's what you want to do because you want to clear space from buildings. But in other cases, you might have in-game goals, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, that reward you for having more forests or that reward you for having fewer buildings. So in those cases, you don't want to lose points for empty spaces on your board, but you also don't want to fill them with buildings. Well, you can either keep the forests you've got or plant more, which I think is a nice little decision and an interesting wrinkle on that resource gathering thing that you see in so many Euro games. So you can use the spaces on the board to get resources like wood, fish, or gold. There is a spot to build buildings, which is pretty standard. You'll have this board that has cards from one of 3 decks that are included in the game. Within each deck are A, B, and C cards, and you'll have some A and B cards laid out for you at the beginning of the game. You can go there and build some of those buildings, add them to your little village area on your player board, and they'll give you possibly some points at the end of the game. Or they'll give you a one-time benefit, or they might give you an ongoing benefit. Any of those things are really possible with those A and B cards that are laid out at the beginning of the game. And then in rounds 4 and 6, you will also have access to C cards, which are mostly kind of in-game point scoring cards where you'll get a lot of points potentially from the stuff that's on these cards. This is one of the areas of the game where I'm really kind of unsure about this decision. Having the A and B cards out from the beginning is nice. It is a little bit overwhelming trying to look at everything that's out there at the beginning and trying to pick a path forward, but it's not nearly as overwhelming as, for instance, Caverna or even A Feast for Odin, which doesn't really give you a lot of choices in terms of its buildings, but it does with its worker placement spots. Nothing in this game feels that overwhelming, but I will say that seeing that many A and B buildings out at the beginning is a lot to absorb, maybe at the upper end of what I would expect for a medium weight Euro game. The other thing I would say about this system, though, is that some of that overwhelming feeling could have been alleviated, I think, by just letting you have those C building cards at the beginning of the game, either by drafting some at the beginning or laying out a few in a display at the beginning or something so that you can see what in-game goals are out there at the beginning and use that to guide your decisions for what kind of engine you're going to build. The choice to leave that until round 4 of the game is a little bit odd because the game's not that long, and I really wish they could have given you more opportunities to plan ahead and build a system that works to your advantage from the beginning. Instead of, you get this flop of cards in rounds 4 and 6, and you just sort of hope that they work out well for the engine that you've already built. That's an odd design choice to me. That's probably my least favorite thing about this game, I would say. I really wish they had changed that so that you could get those cards earlier, but all that to say, it's still not that overwhelming. Getting buildings feels good. The powers that they give you feel good. And it's nice that you can start to cover up those spaces on your board quickly without that feeling that you get from A Feast for Odin, for instance, if you've ever played that, where you've got tons of spaces and you're like, how will I ever cover this up? It doesn't feel that difficult in this game. It feels like you look at your board and you think, okay, I could manage that probably. So I really like the way that they have handled that aspect of it. Just unsure about how those C cards work. But you can use a worker to build a building, which is, again, pretty standard Euro stuff. And then there are a few options that are a little less standard. So one is that you can earn the favor of one of the elders. And basically, you get to recruit one of the elders into your play area, which is basically going to give you your own kind of special power that you can use during the game if you take a worker placement action to activate it. This is a really cool idea. They all feel pretty different and useful. I do think some of them feel more powerful than others. It could just be that I'm not particularly good at the game or don't know how all of them work well, but a few of the elders feel like they're a much more obvious choice. And so it is hard to keep myself from just gravitating to those few every game. But overall, I think that system really works. You do have to pay a fish to use the worker placement action on these elders from the serving table, not from your supply, but from the serving table if you want to use them. And that brings us to our next little section here, which is the serving fish action. This is an interesting little piece of the game because you have this long cardboard piece that looks like a set table with all these plates. And basically, this represents you feeding the elders over the course of the game. So if you take the serve fish action, you are going to start paying fish from your supply to fill up these plates. And you can fill up as many plates as you want to with one action, but it's going to cost you an increasing number of fish every time you fill up another plate. So, for instance, the first plate might only cost you 1 fish to fill up. The third or fourth might cost you 3 or 4 fish, right? So you want to, on the one hand, get as much out of that one action as you can by pooling up your fish and just going all at once, putting down all these fish on the plates in one go. But it's more expensive to do it that way. So if you don't want to tie up all of your fish on the serving table and you want to save some for buildings and that sort of thing, and the game is very tight, so you will want to do that, then you may want to spread it out over a couple of other actions. So it's a really good tension and choice that you've got there in that serve fish action. I really like that quite a bit. And then there's the issue shares actions where you can sell the shares that you've got in your possession for money, or you can use an action to buy some back. And that is pretty crucial because money is really tight in this game. So you're going to want some, especially in the beginning. You'll just be tempted to sell some of those shares, get them out there so that you can start affording buildings or whatever. But money is points, so you definitely want to get money and hang on to it at some point in the game as well. So that's a really good, intense decision. I like that quite a bit. And you also, of course, want to be issuing your shares and getting them back so you're not losing points at the end of the game. So that is really good. I like all that system quite a bit. And one thing I should mention too is that when you serve fish, to go back to that for just a second, the more plates you serve, the more money you get because you get a coin for every plate that you fill. So you can really get a lot of money in one go from serving the fish. And the added benefit of having fish on the plates is that then you can use your elder actions again. It's a really nice set of interlocking systems and mechanisms that in some ways feel familiar, right? Because of course we all build buildings in every Euro game we've ever played. We all gather resources. But this serving fish thing, the elders thing, it all feels just fresh and different, especially with the shares. It feels unlike any other Uwe Rosenberg game that I have played. But that's really the core of the game. You're just going to, every round, place 3 workers. You're going to be selling shares, building buildings, getting resources. And then at the end of the game, you're going to look and see how many points you've gotten. And you will check in the book to see if you have a good score or not, according to Uwe Rosenberg. Now, the one other thing that I will mention here for the solo game specifically is that this game uses that kind of core solo system that he's used in other games where you actually play with 2 different color workers. And so the first round, you place out red workers, and then the second round, you place out blue workers. But those first red workers stay on the board. In other words, the actions that you take the first round, unless they're actions that have more than one space or can be occupied by more than one piece, I guess I should say, they can't be occupied the following round. So you're basically blocking yourself from taking actions twice in a row. This system for me has both benefits and drawbacks. The benefit of it is that it's very simple. It's made even simpler by the fact that you get this little round tracker in front of you that you use every round to not only see what round you're on, see how close you are to the end of the game, but also to see which color you need to be placing, just so you don't forget. And it reminds you when to put out those C cards when the time comes. So that's really great. I like all of that. The downside of it is that even though it's simple, it just doesn't realistically mimic what a multiplayer game feels like, right? You aren't blocking yourself from taking the same action every round in a multiplayer game. Other players might block you. They'll probably be smart to if they can see what you're doing. But this idea that you shouldn't be allowed to take the same action more than one round in a row for some kind of key and crucial actions feels like it handicaps you in a way that prevents you from being able to work out the strategies that you've developed to their fullest. It's not a big deal, and again, it is a trade-off because it's a very simple game to run. You're not spending time on an automa's turn trying to figure out what it does or anything like that. It's a very simple, streamlined game that plays very quickly because you're just taking your actions over and over again. But it can sometimes feel unsatisfying to feel like you're just arbitrarily being blocked by yourself from spaces that would help you to do your best. So some people like it, some people don't. I have mixed feelings about it personally, but overall, I think it works really well here. And I think part of the reason for that is that there is a copy action space on the board as well. So if you really do need to take the same action twice in a row, you can use that copy action space, which is a very nice addition here. So the solo rules are solid. One other thing that I will note here, though, is that it is basically just a beat your own score game, which for a lot of people is not going to be satisfying enough. It's also not quite as satisfying as I would like in terms of the rubric that they give you for what constitutes a good score. You basically get this little note in the rule book that says a score of between, I think it's 30 and 40 is a great score. Well, okay, but I mean, I guess I can infer from there what a good score is, but I really like having one of those charts that tells you, this many points to this many points is very bad, this many points to this many points is bad, that sort of thing, that scale all the way top to bottom so you can judge yourself on that. What's a little different about this system, though, is that they do give you kind of a campaign setting. So this game comes with 3 different decks of building cards, and each one has more cards than you will play with in the course of one single game, which is really cool because it means there's a lot of replayability there. But basically, this game asks you to just keep using cards from that deck for 3 games in a row so that you can see more of the cards from each deck, but also so you can have kind of a more balanced experience that's spread out over 3 games. And if you get a total cumulative score over the course of those 3 games of higher than 100, then you kind of win the campaign setting for the game. It's really neat. I like it quite a bit. It's a good system, and one that feels just a little bit more compelling than a typical beat your own score thing. Also, it's worth noting here too that if you go online on Board Game Geek to some of the forums, you can find special scenarios for this game for solo play that users have created, and you can kind of compete with other users on there to see how well you did at a particular setup of the game. It's really a fun way to add replayability to the game, I think. This happened a lot with A Feast for Odin when it came out, and it looks like there have been several created for Nusfjord as well. So if you're interested in that, go and check out the Nusfjord game page on Board Game Geek for more information about that. Overall, though, I would have to say I'm quite happy with the play of the game, and the replayability of it, as I mentioned, from all those cards in the game is really high. And if you buy that place deck expansion, you get a 4th deck with another 45 cards that you can add in. And I don't know, it just feels like there's a lot of replayability in this box as it is. And if you can add this extra deck of cards, which I think typically costs between $12 and $15 if you live in the US, and it easily adds another hefty amount of replayability to the game from there. So I think that pretty much covers how the game plays, and so since I don't have Carter here to argue with me about various points, I'm just going to move into the good, the bad, and the ugly for this game. And the good for me, the primary good for me, is that this feels in many ways kind of like Uwe Rosenberg's greatest hits in one game. The worker placement feels a lot like Agricola. The buildings and their functions feel a lot like Caverna. The ship track that you have at the bottom of your board, to me, that reminded me almost immediately of A Feast for Odin, where you build these ships and you can use the ships to immigrate, and the immigration, gets you a lot of points, but it also reduces the amount of food that you have to pay your people to keep them fed. To me, this feels like a very streamlined version of that. You get points for the ships, you put them down on the track, and you also, at the same time, get more fish. That kind of double bonus feels really good and very reminiscent of A Feast for Odin. The board size feels a lot like Glass Road. All of it comes together to feel like, hey, here's all the things that you love about my games, just put into one streamlined mid-weight package. This is the Uwe game for everyone. It's simple, it's tight with tough decisions. There are great interactions between the different systems in the game. It's pleasant to look at and to play. There's a ton of replayability in the buildings in the game, and very simple solo rules, including a mini campaign. And you can set up and play this game, in my experience, in about 30 to 40 minutes. That's not too bad. Your first couple of games might take you a little bit longer than that, but for me, that's about how long it's taking right now, which I think is pretty solid. So there's just a lot of good in this game. This is a game that I really, really love. The bad thing about this game, and there are a few, the shares puzzle of figuring out when to issue your shares and when to buy them back is a little bit lost in solo play. You lose some of that tension of wondering if somebody else is going to buy your shares and get your fish from your haul over the course of the game. That is a cool idea and a cool system. It's just not really present here at all because there aren't other players at the table. You just lose your fish to kind of the supply until you buy them back again. It's fine. It's just not as compelling as it was originally designed to be. Also, you have the same elders in every game, and you don't get to play with all the elders that are in here because some of them are meant for higher player counts. That's kind of a bummer for me because the elder powers are really neat and one of my favorite parts of the game, and I would like to be able to have a little bit more variability there. In fact, in future expansions, that would be my number one request, is just for more elders that I could change out during the game so I could see a different set every time. As it is, you're going to play with the same elders in every game, and when you identify a few that look like they're better than the others, you'll probably gravitate toward those every game, which is a bit of a bummer. I mean, some of that will change, and that choice will be affected by the different buildings that are out for sure, but for me, I just find myself revisiting the same 2 or 3 over and over again. So I wish there were more of those. I'm also pretty bummed by the fact that you don't get those C buildings until round 4 or 6. And that's just a personal preference thing. I think some people will like that they're not constrained like that from the beginning of the game. They might find that too restricting. For me, I like having a goal to look forward to at the end of the game and to build my strategy around it. It actually helps me to feel a little bit more relaxed while I play, to know, okay, here's where my focus should be, and I'll just do that this game. Again, not going to bother everybody, but my strong preference would be that you could get those at the beginning of the game without messing up the balance of the scoring system. But those are really the only bad things that I would be able to find in this game. I don't think there's anything ugly about this. This is just a nice, lovely little worker placement package. So if you're looking for an Uwe game to play solo, honestly, this might be my number one choice of Uwe games for solo play. It is very simple and streamlined, plays quickly, tough decisions, just a great game all around with a slightly different theme than what we typically see in Euro games. I mean, yes, it's about building an economy and a business and all that, but the fishing thing is at least a little bit different, right? Maybe? It felt different enough to me. So this is the part of the review where we talk about whether this is a stomp of approval game. I don't know what Carter would say if he was here. My guess is that he probably would not want to give it the stomp just because this isn't really his kind of game anymore. He likes Euro games quite a bit, and actually he really loves Uwe games, but he does increasingly have very little tolerance for games that don't feel highly thematic. So with few exceptions, he likes a lot of theme in his games. If that's what you're looking for, there's not a lot of that here. You are doing things that feel like you're running a fishing business, but it's not a strong and compelling theme, I would say, for most people. So I'm not sure that he would give it the stomp, but he's not here, is he? And I love this game. I think that it's a great worker placement game, an excellent addition to your collection if you're looking for something with a little Euro flair. Great Uwe game for solo players, especially with that little 3-game campaign in the box. It's a small deal, but I really love playing that way, and I think it gives you a chance to explore more of what each deck has to offer. So this game is going to get the stomp of approval from us because it's a game that we love. It's a game that if you only ever buy it for solo play is still totally worth picking up, and it's a game that I think you will play over and over again. And that is our review of Nusfjord from Lookout Games. And that is the end of this episode, folks. We are a member of the Dice Tower Network, if you have not heard that already. That means that you can go on to dicetower.com and find other shows like this one that might be a good fit for your podcast feed. If you haven't gone on there and looked at them, you really should. There's a lot of great shows in the network, and I think you'll find several out there that be a good fit for your tastes. Also, if you haven't yet followed us on Facebook and Instagram, you should do that because we do occasionally host giveaways on there. And we also like to prattle on about our opinions on new games that have come in and give you sneak peeks about reviews that are coming up. So follow us on Facebook and on Instagram at Solosaurus Podcast. If you haven't yet rated or reviewed the show on iTunes, please go ahead and do that for us if you don't mind. It really helps us to make the show a little easier to find for new people. And we would love for as many people as possible to find this and explore the world of solo games and how much joy and value they can add to your life. So if you haven't yet, go ahead and rate us or review us on there. And we have a Board Game Geek micro badge for sale on Board Game Geek for 8 Geek Gold. And we would love for you to get one. If you don't have the Geek Gold for that, send me a message on Board Game Geek, and I am more than happy to spot you the Geek Gold that you need to get that for yourself, because we want to just flood Board Game Geek with those beautiful yellow and purple dinosaurs. And that's all we've got for this episode, folks. Thank you very much for listening to the show. Happy holidays. My name is Brandon Waite. Carter Mackey is not here, and this is Solosaurus.